Welcome, everyone. I'm Michelle Siqueiros. I'm the president here at the Campaign for College Opportunity. And I'm so grateful that you've each joined us today for this webinar. As you all know, we are releasing a new report today, Illuminating Innovations and Protecting Student Enrollment Amid a Pandemic. I hope you'll go to our website, download the report. We will drop it in the chat for you to be able to see both the executive summary and the full report. Today's webinar is going to focus on our findings from this report. But first, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, please put any questions that you might have about the report or in conversation with our panelists in the Q&A box as part of the webinar. We'll try to get to as many as we can in this process. This webinar is being recorded, as you each saw, so it will be available for you to watch and share with others in the coming days. First and foremost, I just want to highlight how concerned all of us have been about the decline in community college enrollment across the country and obviously here in California. As each of you know, the mission of the Campaign for College Opportunity is to ensure greater access to our colleges and universities, and also to ensure that when students arrive at our campuses, they are supported to succeed, to earn a degree, a certificate, or to transfer if that is their goal. And we have worked really hard to shine a light on the necessary supports that students deserve. We have championed the associate degree for transfer. We have championed the elimination of course placement practices that we know are detrimental for students, especially for Black and Latinx students. And we will always champion a focus on investing on student supports and ensuring that we close the persistent racial and ethnic gaps that exist and persist in both preparing students for college and ensuring that they get there. So this report was something that we wanted to do that would focus on two things. We wanted to see what was the impact of the pandemic on community college enrollment at every single community college in California. We have done that analysis. More importantly, we wanted to know if there was variation, and we did find that indeed there were some campuses that didn't lose enrollment at all, and others that only saw a small decline. And we wanted to know, well, what did they do differently, or what practices did they enact that might illuminate some good practices that we should be thinking about investing in and pursuing. I'm super grateful to Colleen Moore, who was the lead researcher on this project, who put this report together on behalf of the Campaign for College Opportunity, and to Vikash Reddy and David Drummer on my own team here at the campaign that helped do the data analysis and support the work. So with that, I am honored to introduce Vikash Reddy, who will present some of the key findings before turning it over to Colleen Moore to discuss what she learned by talking to education leaders at these campuses throughout California. Again, thank you for joining us, and Vikash, passing it to you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'd like to add my thanks both to Michelle and Colleen, two people from whom I learn a tremendous amount on every project that I work with them on. And I'd also like to add to the list Brianna Ramirez, a research fellow at the campaign last year, who helped us with the initial data analyses that fed into this report. As Michelle mentioned, COVID-19 has had a tremendous impact on all of our lives, on all aspects of our lives, and on the ways in which we do business on a daily basis. Nowhere is this more evident than in the world of higher education. Now, far beyond the pivot to online learning that colleges and universities have had to engage in and that students have had to engage in, we've seen fundamental shifts in the higher education landscape over the past 2 years. And these shifts have had a profound impact on enrollment in our colleges and universities. This first chart that I'm showing has enrollment numbers for all three public systems in California: the California community colleges, the Cal State universities, and the University of California system. Now, that top set of bars shows that at our two 4-year segments, the Cal States and the UCs, enrollment over the course of the fall 2019 to fall 2021, so thinking about pre-pandemic to sort of mid-pandemic maybe, or early stages of pandemic, enrollment around a 2% decline at the Cal States, actually a 2% increase at the University of California, but a 19% decline at the California community colleges. That means almost 1 in 5 students either not enrolling or not re-enrolling when we compare fall 2019 to fall 2021. And when we look across race and ethnicity at groups across the spectrum, we see across all groups, California community college students suffered the greatest enrollment declines. And some of these are the greatest for Black students, Latinx students, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander students, and American Indian, Alaskan Native students. Zeroing in on the California community colleges, this next slide shows that across racial and ethnic categories, male students' enrollment dropped more than their female peers. And some of these numbers are and should be eye-popping. More than 1 in 4 American Indian, Alaskan Native students in terms of enrollment declines, 27 to 22% male and female students. Across Black students, 22% of Black male students, an enrollment decline of 19% for Black female students, 22% for Latino students, 15% declines for Latinos. Major declines. And if we look across the state from a geographic perspective, we see that across region after region, these same patterns persist. Now, the chart that we show here is for the the San Diego County. And we show that certainly there were concerning enrollment declines prior to the pandemic. But what we see is that in the fall of 2019, 145,000 students, major declines. That red dot shows fall of 2020, the first full semester where COVID was impacting enrollment and retention. And finally, fall of 2021, a further decline to fewer than 120,000 students. These same trends persist across all of the 7 regions that the community colleges in California are broken down by in terms of the state data systems. Now, this is incredibly important for the state of California. If we as a state want to maintain our position as an economic powerhouse in the world, we need to make sure that we have a college-educated population. This means both tax revenues for the state. This means a workforce that will fill the jobs that we will need filled, but it also means personal income for Californians. A person with a bachelor's degree is going to earn more than $1.4 million more than someone with a high school education or a high school diploma over the course of their lifetime, right? This is a personal thing for California residents, and it's a policy problem for the state. Now, I showed you all a bunch of data around the enrollment declines, and in the aggregate, this is certainly eye-popping and true. But what Michelle mentioned to you is that there are colleges in the state where actually enrollment hasn't declined so far. And in fact, we find 4 colleges in the community college system where enrollment among Black, Latinx, and other underrepresented students has actually increased from fall 2019 to fall 2021, right? Contrary to the narrative. And we look at those increases and compare them to populations actually that did at 3 of these 4 colleges fall. At one of them stayed roughly the same, a total change at Folsom Lake of 36 students. But we see here, it looks to us like maybe there were some intentional efforts to recruit and retain underrepresented minority students. And there's a further set of colleges, around 5 or 6, where we see enrollment declines that we think are pretty modest, right? And I think the other thing that's incredibly important to note about these 6 colleges or 7 colleges is that when you look at the enrollment decline among underrepresented minority students and you look at the enrollment decline among all students, we see a lower enrollment decline among underrepresented minority students at this set of colleges than at the colleges overall, with the exception of 1 campus. Right. And so again, it looks like to us, if underrepresented minority enrollment is falling at rates that are lower than the general campus average, it looks to us as though there is in fact some intentional work going on. And we wanted to figure out what that was. So we called Colleen Moore and we said, hey, Colleen, could you help us out? We wanted to try to make contact with these colleges and talk to administrators, faculty, the folks who you think can help us get some answers. And as I mentioned, I have learned a tremendous amount from her on this project. And so I am delighted to introduce her now to take her through what she has, take us through, I should say, what she has found. Colleen?
Thanks, Vikash, and good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to be here with you today. So Vikash has described the significant enrollment declines we've seen across the community college system over the last couple of years and how they varied across colleges. And so what I did was from these 9 colleges that you see on the screen that we selected, because they had seemed to have smaller losses in enrollment, particularly among Black and Latinx students. So I conducted interviews at these colleges across different roles of people serving at the colleges, asking people to describe the college's efforts to hold on to enrollment and what they think might have had some impact, particularly for Black, Latinx, and other underserved students. So it's important to keep in mind the very exploratory nature of this approach and to note that what these colleges have been doing might not have caused their smaller enrollment losses, as there could be a lot of reasons for that. Also, with very few exceptions, most of the people I spoke with acknowledged having little information about the impact of specific efforts. So the findings largely reflect their perceptions about that. Can I see the next slide, please? Great. So with that in mind, the people I interviewed certainly described a lot of diligent efforts to recover and hold on to enrollment. And those efforts largely fell into 3 broad categories you see here. So the colleges have been trying to increase their enrollment, particularly of underrepresented students, by expanding their outreach and marketing efforts, improving and expanding their student services, and making changes to their schedules, programs, and policies to better meet student needs. Next slide. So across these 3 broad categories of activities, the colleges are using 4 cross-cutting strategies. So they're focusing on equity in access and outcomes for Black, Latinx, low income, and other underserved student populations. They're upgrading their technology and increasing their use of data. They're deepening levels of collaboration, both within the college itself and with partner organizations. And they're working intently to create a more supportive campus culture and leadership structure with a goal of being more welcoming to students and helping them succeed. So I only have time to talk about a few examples from the report. So I'll try to give you some that show how these cross-cutting strategies are incorporated across the 3 types of activities. So in the category of outreach and marketing, the colleges have expanded their efforts to reach out to current, former, and prospective students. So they're doing that through phone calls, emails, text messages, social media, pretty much anything they can think of. As an example of the focus on equity, people often said that these outreach efforts have intentionally focused on underrepresented and low-income students, out of concern for the greater enrollment losses that those populations have seen generally in community colleges, and in recognition of the more significant impacts that the pandemic has had on those students. So the colleges are offering using data to identify students who should be contacted and offered support based on certain criteria, like whether the students had been logging in to online classes, what their grades were, or other factors. And sometimes new technology platforms they've adopted are facilitating that effort. The colleges have increased their collaboration with local partner organizations by, for example, participating in more local events and giving presentations on the educational opportunities they offer. And some people talked about explicit efforts to divide up their lists of students to contact based on race or ethnicity, and assigning the lists to staff that share that background as one aspect of their efforts to make their campus more welcoming to all students. People often talked about how much students seem to appreciate these reach outs from colleges, but they were pretty uncertain about how much effect these efforts actually had on their enrollment, particularly as it relates to contacting former or prospective students. People generally seemed more confident about the results they achieved by reaching out proactively to current students to offer them support to stay enrolled. Can I see the next slide? So in the category of improving student services, colleges described working to provide more flexible, proactive, personalized, and holistic support to increase student success and retention. Some people talked about seeing increased appreciation at their college for how important retention actually is to overall enrollment levels. And so as far as some specific examples of what they were doing, all the colleges I spoke with talked about expanding financial supports in some way through things like transportation and book vouchers as a means of helping low-income students stay enrolled. They implemented new platforms to provide student services virtually, which most of these colleges said they had not done at all or only on a very limited basis prior to the pandemic. People at 5 of the 9 colleges I spoke with described the importance of their student success coaches or success teams, which often involve cross-divisional collaboration to support specific groups of students. And all the colleges talked about offering more training for faculty and staff in the last couple of years, often focusing on the new technology to better serve students or on mental health or equity issues, again, with a goal of creating a more supportive campus culture for students. In the final category of changing schedules, programs, and policies, many people talked about removing financial holds or relaxing payment policies, recognizing that these can pose real barriers to enrollment for low-income and underrepresented students. Some talked about how their college is monitoring enrollment more closely during registration periods and updating their course schedules more frequently to make changes to capture as much enrollment as possible over the course of the enrollment period by, for example, changing the mix of in-person, online, and hybrid courses in response to data on students' choices in which classes are filling up. Some colleges mentioned developing new programs and working more closely with their local employers to make sure that those programs are meeting new workforce needs. And regarding those trainings I mentioned, such as on mental health or equity issues, some colleges were trying to either require or incentivize faculty or staff participation in them, again, with the goal of improving the campus culture for students. So these are just some of the ways these colleges are trying to increase their enrollment, and the report includes a lot of other examples. But I asked people also what challenges they see ahead for continuing or expanding their efforts to regain enrollment. I heard a lot of uncertainty about whether student demand for community college is going to return to prior levels. In part, that's related to media attention we've probably all seen, to surveys suggesting more public skepticism about the value of college. But it was also related to increased competition they perceive in an environment where people have more options to get education and training. And while colleges have received extra funding in the last 2 state budget cycles, along with some federal emergency aid, people expressed concern about what happens as those temporary funds are used up and as some of the flexibility they've been allowed during the pandemic goes away. So flexibility in terms of how funds are allocated and how they can be used. And another concern I heard often was about how challenging it is for people to learn about what changes to policy and practice are actually effective for increasing enrollment and retention. So many people expressed a lot of appreciation for all the extra effort by the Chancellor's office and other organizations to provide webinars and other resources. But I often heard people say that there's a need for ensuring that those practices that are shared actually have a good body of evidence to support their effectiveness. And they wanted the resources to be better organized to make it easier for people to find and access them. Finally, some people pointed to challenges related to policy or to administrative barriers that make their efforts to better serve students and recapture enrollment more difficult. So one example I heard quite a number of times was about the requirement for students to reapply before they can re-enroll if they've stopped out for a while. While they talked about a number of challenges, people pointed to some positive things that have come out of the pandemic experience, often without me even asking them about that. So across these colleges, I heard about how people at the colleges have learned more about the students they serve, the many challenges students face to be successful in college, and the extensive supports they need to succeed. Another positive outcome I heard about a lot is the new software platforms and technology that colleges have adopted, and that they've gotten more people trained and actually using them. And they've gained experience at providing both classes and services online, all things that people see as critical going forward. And while entrenched cultures and practices were noted by some people as a continuing challenge, I also heard about an increased willingness to change and a growing recognition that change is not only possible, as evidenced by how quickly the colleges changed and adapted in so many ways during the pandemic, but also that change is sometimes a good thing and needed. And many people pointed to the enhanced collaboration that was essential to getting through this period as something they hope to see continue. So in response to these findings, the report offers a few broad recommendations for state or system level actions that might better support the colleges in their efforts to enroll students and serve them well. So the first you see there is aimed at addressing the challenges people described with learning about what actually works to increase enrollment and student success. So there may be opportunities for the Chancellor's Office to deploy some of the new staffing resources they were given in the last budget to improve the resources and technical assistance they provide to the colleges, with a priority on ensuring that what they're sharing is evidence-based information and making it more accessible. So I know there's new research planned or started out there that will analyze student data to discern what kinds of changes to policy and practice have actually been effective. So finding ways to make the results of that research in particular widely known and to help colleges implement those approaches will be really important. Second, the people I spoke with often talked about this new normal we're in, with far more online and hybrid education and student services that they really expect to continue going forward. So we need to think more deeply about what that means in the context of our current regulations and our approaches to funding. So the report provides some examples and questions to think about. And as a final recommendation, California really needs some better mechanism for coordination across our education systems. The community college enrollment declines we're talking about today are just one aspect of the big impact the pandemic has had on education in this state. And our current segmented structures are not likely sufficient for the type of coordinated response and planning that we need to best serve students or to meet the state's very ambitious goals for increasing educational attainment and reducing equity gaps. So with that, I'd like to thank the Campaign for College Opportunity for having me this morning. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. J. Luke Wood, Distinguished Professor and Co-Director of the Community College Equity Assessment Lab. He'll be leading the panel discussion with community college leaders. Dr. Wood is an equity-minded scholar and leader committed to ensuring student success, academic excellence, and economic mobility of students of color. Welcome, Dr. Wood.
Thank you so much, Colleen, and the Campaign for College Opportunity for that excellent presentation. I'm Dr. Luke Wood. I serve as a Distinguished Professor of Education and Co-Director of the Community College Equity Assessment Lab at San Diego State University. I'm also a proud member of the board for the Campaign for College Opportunity. And I'm grateful to join this very timely conversation that, of course, is seen at a local level here in the state of California, but really is a national conversation that is taking place. I think that many of us know that community colleges serve as the primary pathway into post-secondary education for historically underserved students. In a recent research published by our lab in partnership with the Association for Community College Trustees, we documented similar troubling findings. Enrollment has declined dramatically for our students of color, and in particular for our men of color. In the report, we noted that the enrollment declines for Black men are 26% and 24% for Native American men. It is clear that as college leaders, we must double down to ensure that students have the opportunity to enroll in community college while intentionally closing the troubling racial and ethnic gaps caused by COVID-19. That is why I'm grateful to be joined today by committed community college leaders to discuss this critical report. Joining us this morning are Jessica Morrison, Vice President of Student Services at the College of the Sequoias, Education Equity Avenger, Dr. Keith Curry, who is also President of Compton College, Dr. Martin D. Mucha Flores, who is Associate Dean of Educational Success at Berkeley City College, and Cristian Palomino, a student leader at Cosumnes River College. Thank you all for joining us today. And so what I'd like to do is have the panelists introduce themselves really quickly by also responding to this initial question. So the first question that I have for you is, the report describes college activities and strategies to recover lost enrollment, particularly among underrepresented and underserved student populations. Can you briefly describe one or two strategies your college is using that seem to show the most promise for achieving this goal?
I'll
Yes,
jump in. Okay. I think I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying our leadership across our district kind of set the tone to let us be really preventative as much as we could be. Our president was kind of all hands on deck. Let's do this. How can we support our community? We represent a very rural area in the Central Valley where the College of the Sequoias is kind of the leader. And we kind of went in with the mindset, if we don't step up for the community, you know, who is? And secondly, our academic senate, just how open they were and flexible to, hey, how do we look at this executive order? And instead of dig our heels in and say, whoa, this is so different, say, they really had the attitude of, how do we help our students with the EW? How do we communicate that? Really powerful conversations about, gosh, we don't want them to just drop when maybe we can help, but where's that fine line? And really working with student services on getting those students referred to counseling and to tutorial. And then our student senate was phenomenal. They stepped in with virtual socials right off the bat. Just anything we could do to try to say, hey, I know we're kind of closing the campus, but how are we going to stay connected? A specific strategy, and I liked Colleen's reference to, it's kind of perception. We're kind of looking back thinking, we think this is why things worked out okay, but it's perception. Our managers initially stayed behind and we never went home during the pandemic, and we would set desks in door jams so students could still come onto campus and get the resources they needed and just ask questions. There was a lot of fear. For the students, there was fear for us. We didn't want to lose our students and we were worried about them. So just right off the bat, those were kind of three things that kind of all of our groups kind of bound together to say, how do we retain our students and how do we make sure that they get their basic needs met, their technology met, so they can stay in their courses. We had band practicing outside. We kept our athletic teams going, although there weren't many teams to compete with. We did it just any pocket on the campus that we could keep our students connected. We worked to do that.
Well, that sounds like an all hands on deck approach.
For sure. It took the entire village.
I will put a different twist on the question. First of all, my name is Keith Curry, President and CEO of Compton College. I'm excited to be here and have the opportunity to speak and share some of my thoughts. The different twist for me is that if you look at the data that was presented, we had a 26% decline from fall of 2019 through fall of 2021 based on the data presented in the report. But if you also look at, if you know the history of Compton College, we had a partnership with El Camino Community College that ended in June of 2019. So we anticipated enrollment was going to decline. However, we did not anticipate COVID-19. And so our enrollment took a dramatic hit. And as one of our theories has always been is continue to be an open campus, we were shut down for a pretty long period of time because we had a high number of infection rate as relates to COVID-19 within our community. And so in order to keep people safe, we had stricter protocols on the Compton Community College District campus. But what we have done, just to give you a sense, so we have the enrollment decline. However, for this winter, coming up for winter 2023, we're up by 23.2% compared to 2 years ago. And for spring, we're up by 9%. But from a year ago, we're up by 25%. So we're starting to see an uptick. Why is that happening from my perspective? I see three things. One is budgets are your value statements. We have enrollment specialists who are working with our dual enrollment program to assist with our high school students to support them for dual enrollment. We have also hired additional outreach staff, one particularly to work with Black and male of color students, but we've really been hiring additional people to support it. We established a call center, which is similar to what other colleges have done. We used the initial COVID-19 block grant money from a year ago to start that, and now we've been able to fund that too with the new block grant money in the budget. But we created a call center. So we hired people, established a call center, but has also doubled down on our marketing and our social media presence as well, getting information out there. And we have also sent more information to the community about what we're doing. A newsletter just went out this past fall about the positive things that are happening on our college campus. We also sent a letter to all high school seniors within our district, admitting them into our College Promise program. And so that's going to help us as well. But we just put an all on deck efforts that's connected to our enrollment management plan, that's also connected to our outreach plan for the college. And I'll drop those two documents in the chat in a second.
In terms of the call center, is that a one-time strategy, or do you see that as an ongoing effort?
I see that's ongoing. So what we have done, initially we funded through the initial COVID block grant, and now we have funded it for the next 4 years through the block grant funds. As most colleges receive one-time money from the state, you have a certain number of years to spend those dollars. And so with the COVID-19 block grant, we're using that as part of re-engagement, and some of that money is being used for the call center. And the reason why it's important, I'm glad you follow up with this, Dr. Wood, is because we have student workers who are making those calls. We have student workers who are working at that facility. And so in order to double down your efforts and support the students with employment, they have to know that this job is just not a one-time affair. And so we have funded it. I'm excited about the work they're doing. And we also have part-time people working in there as well. But it's been one of our ways to be able to reach out to our current students, but also the new students as well. And so it's just another avenue for engagement.
Thank you.
I would like to add some comments. Martin de Mucha, Flores, Berkeley City College, just want to acknowledge all our colegas and colleagues out there and all the little things they did during this pandemic and coming out, that everyone's did something that mattered to a student and to a family and to a community. I echo a lot of the same sentiments of things that we tried that were shared by our colleagues. And what I would share are two things that we started and we carried forward. One is we got really tight with our communication plan to our Black, Latino, Latinx populations based on had they passed in English class, had they not passed, had they dropped from a course, and making that real-time contact to let them know, like, here are some other courses that you might consider enrolling in so that they don't lose momentum. And that has carried forward into this current enrollment cycle in the way that we think about how we're reaching out and connecting with students. Another reflection that I just wanted to share that we started, that we are continuing now, is during the pandemic, for the sheltering high school students, high school teachers had time they were trying to fill. And so what we took advantage of is that we could give them a 30 or 45-minute block of talking about early college preparation. What could they do? How they could connect with us early, doing the CC Apply application with all of them on Zoom, and problem solving and troubleshooting with them. And that built a lot of trust with those students, because they were having a hard time in a virtual world. And they knew when they were going to come back, and even for some of them who were going to continue in a virtual world with a community college, that they needed someone to transition with. And so those healthy transitions really supported and continue to support now, because those same teachers and the siblings of those students who are in that virtual world are reaching out to us and saying, we want to continue on, and we see the value of transferring and not making that immediate jump into a 4 universities where there still is a huge question around, will I be successful? Will I complete? When they're actually seeing the evidence in their siblings of them completing and being successful. So building that family engagement was really important during the pandemic and still continues to be important right now. And the last thing I'll just share as a strategy was our work with our professional development committee across the whole college. We can't say that the murder of George Floyd during that time didn't have an impact, and it has to continue to be carried forward. And during the pandemic, I was really proud of our PD committee and our faculty who leaned really heavily into wanting to talk about what is racial equity, what does justice look like for our students and for ourselves, and how does that play out in the classroom so that the experience really reflects what we talk about our commitments around IDEAA.
Thank you so much. Truly appreciate it. Cristian, the floor is yours. Anything you would like to add?
No, not very much. Honestly, for the most part, it sounds like you guys hit all the topics. I mean, for the really, it looks like you guys did some really good group thinking. And honestly, I'm glad to hear that, you guys are leading in a good path to kind of promote and kind of show students that, hey, look, community college is an option instead of going to UC or CSU. I mean, even then, like Martin just talked about, was, promoting that, CRC is not a place you just go to kind of just doze off. It's a place you go to improve and get better, and then you pursue and you bring what you learned in this environment. Because I personally, like, through my experience through community college, I've gotten really, really good professors, and honestly, like, just having them here kind of like dropping some knowledge on me makes me like grateful that I met these people in a community college, and it makes me more, I guess, excited to see what other people I'm going to meet when I transfer to UC, CSU, whatever I go to. And honestly, it's a very, very beautiful journey, I would have to say. And honestly, like I said, I'm glad to hear you guys made some wonderful improvements for the most part.
I think the feedback is greatly appreciated. So many of you mentioned the use of either success teams or success coaches as one of the strategies, and it's also highlighted in the report. I'm wondering what advice you would have to other institutions that are looking at doing something similar.
I would, for me, and I have a concern when people talk about success teams, because I look at the structure. So at Compton College, our whole guided pathways work and the work we do for success teams is a part of the structure of the organization. And so students that are enrolled in STEM, that's a part of our division for STEM, and also our success team is connected to that. So when I think about the work with our students as we bring them back, we have to support the success teams on the academic side, but also on the student services side. And so the success teams have to be integrated within academic affairs. And so for Compton College, that's how it's integrated. So you have faculty talking to student services folks who are doing the work and following up with students. A prime example of that is our early alert program. We have an early alert program. We're able to do follow-up. Faculty are submitting grades for those students early in the semester, and our student service advisors / coaches are following back up with them based off those early alerts. That is critical as relates to the success team, but it also shows how important it is that the faculty is engaged in that process as well for those success teams through early alert. So my only thing with the success teams is making sure we include the faculty and staff on academic affairs as well as student services, because then people will believe that all the work regards to success is student services, but it's actually a whole college transformation.
It's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just add, and I agree with Keith's comments. We have our success labs. We've got 6 of them, and they're located across our district, and we have them embedded within the academic areas of our campus. And although they are, our success coordinators are considered student services staff, and we have counselors embedded in those programs as well, specific for those students, the actual labs are embedded out in our academic buildings. And so a faculty member at any time will just walk a student over and say, hey, I think the student might need some extra support, or hey, is there anything you can help here? And our labs are kind of built with a very kind of fun, open environment, not like, oh, are you in this program? Fill out this application first. We get the students going first on what their needs are, and then kind of do the things behind the scenes to make sure that they are engaged. But one thing, we've been running our Student Success Center and labs for, 7 years. But one thing the pandemic showed us is that, wow, but if you're not in that program and you're not in EOPS, and if you're not in the Puente Project and you're not with DSPS services, and we were feeling so good, we were covering the majority of our students, but we still had this probably quarter of our students that weren't connected directly to someone. Now, what we do know is that our faculty are amazing. So a lot of students have that deep connection with a faculty member, which is everything. So as we did these phone banks, we called all of the students that were not getting the calls, that were not connected. And our student services staff were so wonderful because, and we actually had instructional faculty too that said, hey, I'll get on a phone bank. And what we learned was those students wanted to be connected, and it's a practice that we'll always keep. So students that weren't already connected to one of these programs, we're getting them connected and making those calls. And as Colleen pointed out in her findings from all of these colleges, students were so grateful and appreciative. And for once they answered their phones and called us back and said, thanks for calling, we missed you guys. So that I agree with Keith's strategy. It's got to be across all, no silos, across all sections of campus.
Yeah, absolutely. So we only have a few minutes left before we're going to move to time for the audience to be able to ask questions. So I did want to ask about silver linings, and that was one of the things that Colleen mentioned in her presentation in the report. What have been some of the silver linings, the things that we have learned from the pandemic that have been beneficial, lessons that we want to, on things that we want to keep going and moving forward?
I would say for me is the basic needs of our students is real. And what I've learned during the pandemic, so at Compton College, every student get a free meal and employees Monday through Thursday through our cafeteria every table. We have a farmer's market for students every Wednesday, and they receive $20 to be able to purchase food. What I've learned through the pandemic and also technology pieces is that we really have to put basic needs at the forefront of our work. And we really have to be unapologetic about that. And so I've seen it now more that students need more and more. Look at the amount of emergency aid we provided to our students. That shows that financial aid reform is critical. We have to figure out ways to support our students, but basic needs has to be a priority for our campuses.
No, I would just add to that. Is the response to when people say, well, you know, what do we want to do, is more so what is it going to take to get that done, right? Prior to the pandemic, there was always a level of proving someone's poverty, right? Proving I deserve this resource. And what we were able to learn in the pandemic is pulling back some of those things. They're like, so if I just gave you the document as attachment, was that sufficient? Right? Not having to someone always walk in this certified copy to prove that it was what the service they were eligible for was actually they should get, that we could take things from them and that would meet the compliance of the program. And so that was like a big piece that we held on to, is always trying to work towards getting to yes for our students versus always saying no to them and then sending them to go meet someone else in the same college often that they worked in to find a way to work around. And so I think we're really getting to that place of being innovative, right? Trying to take some risk, knowing that like we have a lot of flexibility, and always getting to really saying, so what is it going to take, right? No more like that we see the problem, right? Yes, we see the disparities, but so what is it going to take to resolve that disparity and step into it and be active about deconstructing those barriers and really reconstructing a more resilient environment for our students?
Thank you. Cristian, from the student perspective, what are some of the things that you learned during the pandemic that you feel you can carry forward, or that you saw other students learn?
Honestly, through the pandemic, I learned how to be more self-assertive. I feel like it kind of showed me that, you know, as much aid and as much support as you're willing to seek, is at the same time you have to take initiative on your own success. You can't just rely on someone else's help. I mean, yeah, there's resources there, but at the same time, I did see a lot of students in my Puente cohort kind of drop out just because they felt like there wasn't enough support, when in reality they just weren't doing the work when they needed to. And honestly, like I just feel like there's some professors that are kind of lenient on that. Like they'll be like, yeah, sure, you can submit the assignment whenever you have time and whatnot. But at the same time, I do see that, you know, making it more flexible for students is like really important. I feel that's what COVID kind of showed me, like how do I personally make my schedule flexible to kind of work with me, work, and then school, and then my personal life, you know. So I feel like it showed me that for the most part.
Great points there. At this point, we're going to transition to audience questions. We have the Q&A function, and I know that people have been putting in questions, and there's one that we're going to go ahead and begin with. It says, as California prepares to enter a year of fiscal prudency, what do you all believe are statewide policy opportunities to remove barriers and promote student success and enrollment, considering new investments at the state level may not be possible?
Well, I'll take a stab at that one.
All right,
So there's a few things talked about in the report. I mean, I think that's probably a very good assumption that unlike in the last two budget cycles, we're likely not going to see a lot of new investments. Now, we do have the benefit that there have been some very significant new investments over the last couple of years, some of which, you know, the funding will still be around for a little while for the colleges to use. So, but, you know, in terms of things that don't cost anything new that I learned through this process that people think were effective is a lot of this work that colleges have done in removing administrative barriers to students really didn't cost them much of anything. I mean, you know, some of it was helped by new technology platforms that they obtained and things like that. But mostly it was just, you know, entrenched practices that was just there because that's the way we've always done it. And we always close at 5 o'clock and you got to come back tomorrow, you know, and bring this piece of paper you didn't have with you or whatever. And so the ways that they found to, you know, do things more online, which is more efficient, and to pass things from one office to another office themselves, rather than making the student go through that. Those things don't cost anything. And people, you know, talked a lot about, you know, how much that helped. And in terms of the system level or the state level, I mean, I think there's room, which is why one of the recommendations I made was to sort of review our regulations, Title V, and, you know, other kinds of processes at the system-wide level to look for opportunities to remove barriers that are there, because there may be things there that really are not, you know, helpful in an environment going forward where we have a lot more online, hybrid, whatever kinds of approaches. And so again, I'm not sure that those things would cost money. You know, I mean, they take staffing time, which fortunately the Chancellor's office now has more of. So I think that that's another thing that could be done, is just to look at our existing regulations and policies and where can we maybe extend some of the things that we've, you know, done temporarily as a way of introducing more flexibility to the pandemic situation. And maybe we don't need some of those things back. Maybe there's other areas like the one I mentioned in the presentation about students having to reapply. You know, I mean, if students have to do an extra step of submitting another application, sometimes for some students, that one extra thing is going to mean the difference between them enrolling and not, when if they could have just gotten on and used their old, you know, student ID number or what, and just enrolled in classes like they wanted to do. So I think there's probably opportunities like that.
Yeah, and Colleen, I'm glad you mentioned this. I support everything you said, and I would just add that at Compton College this past year, we've been doing a reset and just thinking through some processes and things we're doing. I found out 3 critical problems this past semester. One was about students and the change of major and what that process looked like and the barrier that there are just to change a major. The second thing we found out was looking at just a graduation application and that whole process and what it looks like for students with certificates and how we can improve that. And the third piece of it that we've been working on is just student petitions. And students submit petitions, they get bogged down through the petition process, but that's another barrier. So it's not only just pausing on your campus to look at your policies and procedures and practices, but then also looking to statewide, what are some of the policies? I don't think we need new policies. I think we need to be able to review the current policies and current practices on our campuses to be able to improve it. And then again, budgets are your value statements. If certain programs and services are not working, scrap them and do something different that could be effective. We're always looking for new resources instead of looking at the resources we have from within.
That's a great point. And maximizing the use of those resources. One of the questions that came in, they said that they heard you, President Curry, mention the importance of basic needs funding and technology for students. How can community college counselors start conversations with our college leadership about new and unique ways to allocate funds and resources that support students? And is that connected to what you just said? Is it looking within?
It's looking within and looking at your budget. With the amount of money that the state put in, or their investment in community colleges, how do we allocate those dollars to ensure that the dollars are being utilized for students? How do you maximize your basic needs budget, your basic needs center budget, but also your basic needs services budget, right? There's so many different budgets that are out there. How are we allocating those resources on our campus to ensure that they're getting to the students? So the reason why I brought up the basic needs, you can use those budgets to help pay for technology. You also can use the COVID-19 block grant funds to pay for technology. You also can use your general fund. So there's no excuses for people to say, oh, we don't have the money. Because you remember, once the pandemic happened, colleges found money to purchase technology for students and also for their employees. It has to be a priority. but also Wi-Fi has to be a priority. I saw part of their question was technology. Wi-Fi access has to be a solution, but it cannot be the Wi-Fi hotspots. We have to figure out ways to put technology in students' homes.
Yeah, I'd like to add too that agree with everything that the panelists are saying. We have resources within. We have been given more money over the last couple of years than a lot of us have seen in about 10 years here in the system. But one of the pockets of funds that I think is kind of gone unmentioned about just in kind of all of my circles are the student retention and enrollment outreach funds package, which was, $90 million to us. And for our college, it's a significant amount of funds. And what I'd like to give a shout out to how these funds were brought down to us, since so many have so many barriers and strings and hoops we have to jump through. I feel like this package of funds is really, I loved the memo we received. It was very specific on who and how these funds were to be spent on our disproportionately impacted students, particularly males. And that gives me as an administrator all the leverage I need to go in and talk to groups and I don't think anyone would disagree. And so with those, we were able to hire an HBCU director, an in-reach specialist. We work so much on outreach and we have our student success centers and teams, but who is our in-reach team that is making sure, hey, did you apply for financial aid on time? We know you're continuing. Why'd you miss your registration date? To that group of students that are missing it, they're with us, but they're just on the cusp. And so I just, we feel very grateful to have received those funds. We've kind of figured out the prioritization of laptops and hotspots and all of that early in the pandemic. And now we're thinking, how do we take it a step further where our work is really deep and meaningful and sustainable, and that the students understand and everyone kind of is connected or belongs somewhere. So that's kind of how we're looking at going forward and really keeping that student connection.
Dr. Wood, can I provide just one last, one of the smaller colleges in a 4-college and multi-college district, right? Like it's always a struggle with how much funds we can get based on our allocation model. And so one of the things we got smart at, and I would encourage folks to think about this, is how do you break your federal funds from your HSI, your NAPZ with your state funding, right? And how these things speak to each other, because then becomes a real big lift of then sustaining these innovative practices that allow us to take some risk, right? Without knowing that's going to cost us anything. And then the things that we find we really lower, then we can support with general funds or other categorical funds. And the other part I would just add is that it's also for us at BCC, we're getting smart about how we're braiding together our categorical program. So like, how do we have our EOPS program our UCRC embedded with our EOPS program or Dreamer Centers? How these things are all talking to each other so that students aren't being sent across campus, to our previous panelist conversation, and that all basic needs are right in the front, right? There's no, I think one of our panelists says before that there's not, everything you get should be, I've decided to opt out. I don't want that free thing, right? I don't want that extra service. They're physically saying or verbally saying, I'm opting out of this, but as colleges, we're opting students in to as many services as they would be eligible on the front end without them saying that, hey, I qualify for that.
Well, thank you. We are pretty much at time for this conversation, but I wanted to give the last word to Cristian as our student representative. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we turn it over to Jesse to conclude the webinar?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, well, we are at time, and we want to thank all of our panelists for their thoughtful contributions to this conversation. Obviously, there was a lot taking place in the chat window in terms of just excitement around this and wanting to learn more. Thank you to the campaign for this timely report and for having us join together this morning. It's now my pleasure to introduce Jesse Ryan, who is the Executive Vice President for the campaign and a former community college transfer student, to conclude the webinar. Jesse.
Thank you, Dr. Wood. I would like to begin by thanking all of our presenters. This was such an important and timely conversation. And while Cristian said he didn't need any closing words, I think he offered one of the most powerful statements of this webinar, which is that we need to design our schedules, our practices, our campuses to be student-centered, student-ready. right? So critical as we meet these enrollment challenges moving forward. I want to thank each of our speakers and the incredible report contributors for their leadership, for their student commitment, and for the innovative spirit that they show in doing this work in the field. Dr. Curry said that we have to be unapologetic about supporting student needs, unapologetic, because it is only with that willingness to go all in that we can meet these challenges head on. As Colleen and others shared, we are in a time where after years of investment, we're likely to see deficit spending in California, but we can't let our innovation or our willingness to do right by students stop because we have fewer resources. We're going to need to work together to support scaling the evidence-based high-impact practices that Colleen, Jessica, and others spoke to today. We're going to need to advocate for the type of long-term, intersegmental, strategic, statewide approach to re-enrollment and to pandemic recovery, a statewide approach that we believe comes with coordination and a statewide coordinating entity. I know that we'll continue the conversation after we log off this webinar, but please, we invite our participants to come and be part of our signature event. It's going to be held virtually this year on December 14th, and we think it's going to be a really rich conversation. Equal opportunity in college access and student success, featuring the U.S. Department of Education Assistant Secretary of Post-Secondary Education, Dr. Pedar. We also were very excited that just today, our president, Michelle Siqueiros, was able to secure someone who has argued in front of the Supreme Court, David Hinojosa, who is going to speak to our efforts to preserve affirmative action for students and college opportunity across the country. Finally, we hope that you'll download this report and share this report as we seek to meet the needs of students and close racial equity gaps across the state of California. We also hope that you'll continue this conversation online under the hashtag Illuminating Community College Enrollment. And I think there's no better way to close this webinar than to come back to Jessica's words, which are that it takes a village. If we are going to meet this moment, if we are going to re-enroll community college students and support their success, closing racial equity gaps across the state, it takes a village, and we can only do this work together. Thank you so much for being part of our coalition and being part of today's conversation.